Look at this map. Straight lines, clear borders. Countries that appear as eternal entities. Turkey, Iraq, Syria, Iran. But this map lies. It is a modern illusion, barely a century old. Beneath these artificial lines lies an older, far more complex truth. The truth of a single nation, whose land was forcibly divided to feed these new states. This isn't a story about drawing borders. It's a story of erasing a nation from the map. The story of the greatest redistribution of wealth and power in the 20th century. A story that began with a promise of independence and ended in division.
To understand how this promise was born and how great the betrayal that followed, we must go back to 0 hour. The fall of the Ottoman Empire was not merely a military defeat. It was a resounding economic collapse. In the late 19th century, European debts drowned the state, to the point it was forced to establish the so-called Ottoman Public Debt Administration in 1881. An institution that was practically under European banks and took control of the state's most vital revenues. Thus, the empire lost its economic sovereignty long before it lost its political sovereignty, by decades. But amidst this collapse, the world was witnessing the birth of a new idea, powerful and seductive. The principle of people's right to self-determination, as put forth by U.S. President Woodrow Wilson. His 12th point was addressed directly to the Ottoman Empire. It stated, "Secure sovereignty for the Turkish portion of the present Ottoman Empire, but an absolute opportunity for autonomous development must be guaranteed to other peoples." An absolute opportunity was not just a phrase, it was a legal and diplomatic mandate, opening the door for the Arabs, the Armenians, and the Kurds. And here, at the crossroads of an empire's collapse and the rise of a new principle, the Kurdish people found their historic opportunity. With a rich history and an identity shaped by rugged geography, the Kurds were not mere spectators, but rather active players who saw the moment had come to break centuries of dependency and seize the dream of a Kurdish state from the ruins of an empire.
August 10th, 1920. The Treaty of Sèvres is signed in a small French town that would lend its name to one of the most controversial documents in Middle Eastern history. A treaty between the victorious Allied powers and a defeated Ottoman Empire, aimed at redrawing borders, redefining nations, reshaping the future. Arabs, Armenians, and the Kurds each were promised a new beginning. For the Kurdish people, Sèvres felt like a dream, finally within reach. Articles 62, 63, and 64. Clear, bold, historic. These clauses promised Kurdish autonomy in Anatolia, and, within a year, a chance for full independence through a democratic vote. For the first time, the world acknowledged the Kurdish right to self-determination. At the Paris Peace Conference, Sharif Pasha, the Kurdish delegate, unveiled a vision, a map, a nation, a future. From north of Zivan near the Caucasus to Erzurum, Kema, Arabgir, southward through Sinjar, Erbil, Suleymania, and Sanandaj, east to Rwanda's, Baskal, up to Mount Ararat. The dream was vast, rich in history, resources, and hope. But maps are not enough. Promises are not guarantees. The treaty lit a flame, but the winds of geopolitics blew hard. Kurdish hopes clashed with other realities. The Van region excluded. Armenian claims prioritized. In response, Emin Ali Badirkhan proposed another map, one that reclaimed Van and offered access to the sea through Hatay. Diplomacy followed. Kurds and Armenians issued a joint declaration, letting go of claims to Erzurum and Sassoon, still negotiating over Adi and Mush. Yet even then, the treaty only considered lands within Turkey's remnants, ignoring Kurds in Iran, Iraq, and Syria. Why? Because those lands were now under British and French mandates. And in the end, none of it was implemented. By 1926, the borders between Iraq and Turkey were finalized. Kurdish claims were erased. Even Article 63, once guaranteeing Assyrian protection, was voided in the Treaty of Lausanne. What began as a promise of freedom ended as a footnote. A dream dissolved in ink, a people divided. The Treaty of Sèvres remains, a chapter of what could have been. Forgotten by the world, but not by the Kurds.
While the Kurds were celebrating the promises of Sèvres, a new wind was rising from the depths of Anatolia, a wind that would overturn everything. On May 19, 1919, the Turkish War of Liberation erupted, known as Kurtuluş Savaşı, the War of Independence. It was led by Mustafa Kemal Pasha, a seasoned general sent by the Sultan to restore order, but he soon became the leader of the resistance against the Sultan himself. The war broke out after the Allied powers divided up Ottoman territory, despite the signing of the Armistice of Mudros, which had ended the Ottomans' participation in World War I. The Turkish national movement faced multiple enemies: Greece in the west, Armenia in the east, France in the south, and Britain and Italy in Istanbul. On the Western Front, Britain landed Greek forces in Izmir as part of the Megali idea, the plan for a greater Greece. That lit the spark of war. In response, the Turkish resistance organized itself in Ankara and established the Grand National Assembly, a government to rival that of Istanbul. The Ankara government rejected the Treaty of Sèvres, declaring it illegitimate and unpatriotic. The movement organized the Kuvay Milliye militias into a regular army and led decisive battles against Greek forces, most notably the First and Second Battles of Inonu. Despite their rapid advance, Greek forces stretched their supply lines far from their base in Izmir and plunged deep into the rugged Anatolian interior, where they couldn't maintain logistics. That was a strategic mistake that cost them everything. The Turkish army launched a full-scale counteroffensive, recapturing Izmir and effectively ending Greek presence in Anatolia. This was followed by the Chanak crisis and the signing of the Armistice of Mudanya,
which paved the way for a new political era. By 1923, the Sultanate was abolished, the Caliphate dismantled, and the modern Republic of Turkey was proclaimed. The Allies were forced back to the negotiating table and signed the Treaty of Lausanne, which buried Sèvres and redrew the map of modern Turkey. And so, the promises of Sèvres collapsed before they could ever be fulfilled, and the Kurdish dream of independence faded into a memory. With the rise of the Turkish Republic on the foundations of nationalism, a new chapter began, one of political exclusion and official denial of people's rights to self-determination. But the story of the fading Kurdish dream holds within it another painful chapter, one that reveals the deep complexity of the political and social landscape during that turbulent era. While the Treaty of Sèvres promised the Kurds an independent state, several Kurdish tribes were fighting alongside Mustafa Kemal Atatürk in the Turkish War of Independence, unaware that they were, in effect, fighting against their own political future. Atatürk and his movement succeeded in attracting many Kurdish tribes through a shrewd and multi-layered strategy. First, they exploited the shared Islamic identity. Atatürk presented himself as a defender of Islam against the Christian European powers that had occupied Ottoman lands. This religious rhetoric deeply resonated with the conservative Kurdish tribes, who viewed the conflict more as a sacred religious war than a nationalistic one. Atatürk capitalized on Kurdish fears of European partition, positioning himself as a guarantor of the unity of Islamic lands against Western conspiracies. He assured Kurdish tribal leaders that the new Turkey would be a united Islamic state, one that respects ethnic and cultural diversity and grants the Kurds their full rights within this unity. These promises, which seemed sincere at the time, convinced many Kurdish leaders that their interests were better served by supporting the Turkish national movement rather than waiting for the vague promises of Sèvres to materialize. Third, practical and economic considerations played a key role in this alliance. Many Kurdish tribes relied on cross-border trade and pastoralism, and they feared that dividing the region according to the Treaty of Sèvres would harm their economic interests. Atatürk exploited these concerns, promising to protect traditional trade routes and maintain the existing economic system. He also offered cooperating tribes special privileges and positions in local administration, making alignment with him appear far more attractive than risking everything on an undefined Kurdish state. The contribution of Kurdish tribes to the Turkish War of Independence was critical to victory. Their knowledge of the rugged mountain terrain, their guerrilla warfare expertise, and their traditional combat skills all helped Turkish forces achieve key victories against foreign armies. Their apparent loyalty to Atatürk also gave his movement additional legitimacy, portraying the conflict to the world not merely as a Turkish war, but as an Islamic liberation struggle involving all the peoples of the region. But once the War of Independence ended and victory was secured, everything changed. Atatürk, who had promised the Kurds equality and respect in the new Turkey, began implementing a policy of forced Turkification, aimed at melting all minorities into a singular Turkish identity. The promises made to the Kurdish tribes were forgotten. A systematic campaign began to suppress Kurdish culture and language and to marginalize the very Kurdish elites who had helped achieve that victory. Thus, the Kurdish tribes found themselves in a tragic position. They had helped destroy the only real chance of establishing an independent Kurdish state, and yet received none of the promises made to them. They became the victims of a complex political game,
in which their religious sentiments, economic fears, and short-term interests were manipulated to serve larger political goals they could not fully comprehend. This painful lesson in politics and betrayal remains etched in the Kurdish collective memory, a key to understanding the challenges still facing the Kurdish cause today.
On July 24, 1923, after arduous negotiations that lasted for months, the Treaty of Lausanne was signed in Switzerland. This treaty served as the final peace settlement between modern Turkey and the Allied powers, completely nullifying the previous Treaty of Sèvres.
More importantly, it completely ignored the Kurdish issue, as if the Kurdish people did not exist on the political map of the world. The Treaty of Lausanne contained no clause granting the Kurds the right to self-determination or autonomy. The old promise was utterly erased, and the Kurdish people, once aspiring to their own independent state, were forcibly divided among 4 new countries: Turkey, Iran, Iraq, and Syria. Suddenly, the Kurds became minorities in each of these states, beginning a long journey of suffering, repression, and attempts to erase their cultural and linguistic identity. This treaty was a crushing blow to their dream and legalized their geographic and political division, deeply impacting their social and economic fabric. The Treaty of Lausanne created a new, bitter reality for the Kurds. Instead of a united sovereign nation, they became a scattered people, facing immense challenges to preserve their identity and existence. This historical tragedy was not a mere passing event, but a decisive turning point that sowed the seeds of instability and conflict in the region for decades to come. Lausanne was the third pivotal event, ensuring the Middle East would remain an open battlefield for generations, and that the Kurdish issue would remain a thorn in the region's side. The division of the Kurdish people among 4 nation-states was not just a matter of drawing lines on a map. It marked the beginning of a series of deep political and social consequences, consequences that still shape the region to this day. In Turkey, the largest Kurdish population in the world became a challenge to the state's vision of national identity. Since the founding of the Turkish Republic, efforts to integrate Kurds into a singular Turkish identity led to repressive policies. The Kurdish language was banned, Kurdish identity was denied, cultural expression was suppressed. These policies triggered repeated uprisings, most notably the Sheikh Said Rebellion of 1925, and later the emergence of the PKK in the 1980s, leading to a decades-long armed conflict that claimed tens of thousands of lives and saw entire Kurdish villages burned to the ground. What the world now calls genocide left deep scars in Kurdish collective memory and reinforced the longing for autonomy, or even independence. In Iraq, the Kurdish struggle spanned multiple regimes, from monarchy to republic to Ba'athist dictatorship. The bloodiest chapter came under Saddam Hussein, the Anfal campaigns, where chemical weapons were used against Kurdish civilians. Hundreds of thousands were killed, and thousands of villages wiped off the map. What the world now calls genocide left deep scars in Kurdish collective memory and reinforced the longing for autonomy, or even independence. In Iran, Kurdish identity faced similar suppression, whether under the Shah or after the Islamic Revolution. the Iranian state sought to impose Persian or Shia Islamic identity on a mostly Sunni Kurdish population. Following the 1979 revolution, Kurdish demands for autonomy were rejected and violently crushed under the banner of preserving national unity. In Syria, Kurds lived under decades of marginalization by the Ba'ath regime. Many were denied citizenship and subjected to forced Arabization policies. But the Syrian uprising in 2011 changed everything. Kurds carved out an autonomous administration in northern and eastern Syria, becoming a key player in the civil war and in the battle against ISIS. Politically divided, the Kurdish people also experienced deep social fragmentation. Families, clans, and communities were severed by artificial borders. Over time, distinct Kurdish identities emerged, shaped by different national contexts. Kurds in Turkey are not the same as Kurds in Iraq, or in Iran, or Syria. Yet they all share a common root. State-driven assimilation policies led to the loss of vast segments of Kurdish cultural heritage. Especially in cities where pressure to conform was greatest, there was a systematic erasure. The Kurdish language itself became endangered in some regions, banned from schools, forbidden in the media, and pushed out of public life. As a result, fewer young Kurds today speak their mother tongue, especially in urban centers. But, despite all odds, the Kurdish people have shown extraordinary resilience. Transnational cultural networks have emerged, connecting Kurds across borders. The internet and modern media have played a key role in rebuilding identity. In recent decades, we've witnessed a Kurdish cultural renaissance in literature, music, cinema, and academia. A people long divided are finding ways to unite once again through language, memory, and hope. But perhaps the most complex and significant dimension of Kurdistan's partition is the economic and geopolitical one. The Kurdish regions are not just rugged mountain lands, they are among the richest areas in the world in natural resources and strategic corridors. This natural wealth, which could have laid a strong economic foundation for an independent Kurdish state, instead became a source of conflict and competition between regional and global powers. In Iraq, the Kurdistan region holds oil reserves estimated at around 45 billion barrels, making it one of the most oil-rich areas in the Middle East. This oil wealth was not just a source of income, but a political card in the relationship between the Kurdistan regional government and the central government in Baghdad. The conflict over control of oil revenues and the right to sign exploration contracts with foreign companies became a central axis in the political tensions between Erbil and Baghdad. A complex network of oil and gas pipelines also runs through Kurdish areas, linking energy fields in Iraq and Iran to Turkey and Europe. These pipelines don't just carry energy, they carry influence, dominance, and control over regional pathways. In addition to oil and gas, Kurdish regions hold massive water resources, with major tributaries of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers originating there, giving them a vital role in the region's water security equations. Kurdish areas also lie on strategic trade routes linking the Arabian Gulf, Turkey, Iran, and Syria. This economic wealth and strategic location make the Kurdish question more than just a minority rights issue. It is a geopolitical issue par excellence. But this natural wealth has not translated into prosperity for the Kurdish people. These resources remain trapped in conflict, plundered at times, restricted at others, while the population suffers from poverty, unemployment, and poor services. The immense natural wealth in Kurdish regions, oil, gas, water, and strategic location represents vast economic potential yet to be fully realized. These resources, which could have built a prosperous, independent Kurdish state, remain today a source of conflict and rivalry, and a painful reminder of what could have been had the forgotten promise of the Treaty of Sèvres been fulfilled. The legacy of dividing the Kurdish people is not confined to the past. It continues to shape the present and the geopolitical future of the region. Today, Kurdish areas have become a complex battleground for both regional and international conflicts, where the ambitions of global powers collide with the aspirations of the Kurdish people, creating ever-shifting political dynamics. The Kurdish role became unmistakably clear during the war against ISIS between 2014 and 2019. Kurdish forces, whether the Peshmerga in Iraq or the YPG in Syria, stood at the front lines of the fight against this brutal terror group. Their courageous role turned them into vital allies of the US-led international coalition, earning them global sympathy and support. But that same heroic visibility also exposed them to new risks and political complications. Turkey viewed the growing Kurdish influence in Syria as a direct threat to its national security. This fear drove Ankara to launch repeated cross-border military operations, justified as a campaign against so-called Kurdish terrorism. Meanwhile, Iran seeks to expand its influence in Kurdish areas, especially in Iraq, where it uses loyal militias as a pressure card against the Kurdistan regional government, deepening internal divisions and worsening security fragility. The United States and Europe continue to see the Kurdish regions as strategic partners in the fight against extremism, yet their support has always been limited, tied more to short-term interests than long-term commitment. On several occasions, Washington abandoned its Kurdish allies in favor of agreements with Ankara, leaving them to face the consequences alone. Amid this complexity, Russia seeks to exploit tensions between Western allies to expand its own influence in Syria and Iraq. By capitalizing on the growing mistrust between the Kurds and their Western partners, Moscow negotiates with everyone, makes promises to everyone, while quietly securing its own position within the regional equation. Trapped between all these power plays, it is the Kurdish people who continue to pay the highest price in blood, displacement, marginalization, and the denial of their basic rights. Kurdish regions today represent a living laboratory for modern geopolitics, where regional and global interests intersect with the hopes of a people striving for justice. The Kurdish question is no longer just about minority rights or humanitarian concerns. It is a central pillar for achieving peace and stability in the Middle East. Any lasting solution to the region's crises must consider the legitimate aspirations of the Kurdish people and the vital role they can play in shaping a more stable, just, and inclusive future. Despite all the challenges and conflicts, the story of the Kurdish people is not one of despair, but one of resilience and determination to survive and evolve. The Kurds have proven themselves capable of governing their affairs efficiently and democratically, even in the most difficult circumstances. Moreover, the growing international recognition of the Kurdish role in combating terrorism and protecting minorities has shown that the Kurds were not merely victims, but active partners in building a safer and more just world. The lessons learned from a century of Kurdish struggle suggest that lasting solutions to Middle Eastern conflicts require the recognition of all people's rights, including their right to self-determination and the preservation of their cultural and linguistic identity. Perhaps the promise made in the Treaty of Sèvres has been forgotten, but the Kurdish dream has not died. New generations of Kurds carried the stream in new forms, more mature and realistic, and more open to cooperation with others. The future may bring new opportunities to realize this dream, not necessarily as a single independent state, but perhaps in various forms of autonomy and regional partnership that respect diversity and deliver justice to all the peoples of the region. Thus, the story of the forgotten promise and the division of the Kurdish people remains one of the most profound lessons in contemporary geopolitics. It is a story that reveals how political decisions made behind closed doors can shape the fate of entire peoples for generations, and how natural resources and strategic locations can become a curse rather than a blessing when they turn into arenas of conflict between major powers. But it is also a story of resilience and determination, a story of a people who refused to break despite all hardships and who held on to their identity and dreams against all odds. Today, the Kurdish people, with their diverse experiences in governance and administration, and their pivotal role in fighting terrorism and preserving diversity, offered the world a model worth emulating in facing contemporary challenges. The Kurdish issue remains a key to understanding the dynamics of conflict and peace in the Middle East. A just and lasting solution is not only a legitimate right for the Kurds, but a necessity for the stability of the entire region. History teaches us that true peace cannot be built on the oppression of peoples or the denial of their legitimate aspirations. And perhaps the time has finally come to turn the forgotten promise into a lived reality and to end a century of suffering and conflict by building a future that respects the rights of all the region's peoples to live with dignity and freedom on their land.